You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Who do you think of when you read the word terrorist? You might think of the Abu Sayyaf or other extremist groups down south. Or maybe your mind goes to the communist insurgency. But the reality is, our law has a very different idea of terrorism, and one that might affect you personally when you least expect it. I'm Ted Te, human rights lawyer, criminal law professor, and host of the podcast Te Talks. You're listening to Teka Teka Ted, the legal commentary segment of Teka Teka News, where we answer questions about law and government. In this episode, let's talk about terrorism.
The Anti-Terrorism Council, or the ATC, has taken a decisive step in the fight against terrorism. Based on probable cause and unwavering commitment, the ATC has officially designated individuals and groups that pose a grave threat to our nation's well-being. We have designated Congressman Arnolfo Teves and his armed group, the Teves Terrorist Group, as terrorists. The decision comes after meticulous investigation into their violent activities that have caused harm to innocent lives in Negros Oriental, including that of Governor Roel Degamo.
That was Justice Department spokesperson Miko Clavano. As you heard, the Anti-Terrorism Council has designated 13 people, including former Negros Oriental Governor Edwin Bata Teves and his brother former Governor Pride Henry Teves as terrorists. The council found probable cause that the 13 individuals violated various provisions of the Anti-Terrorism Law, including planning, training, preparing, and facilitating terrorist acts, recruitment and membership in a terrorist organization, and providing material support to terrorists. That was back in March 4. It's also worth mentioning that the circumstances of that case are yet unclear. At the time of the designation, no court had actually issued a warrant for Teves' arrest.
Very critical. Pwede ko sabihin sa inyo, very critical ang information niya. Main player, one of the main players dito sa naganap na pangyayari. Itong taong ito, kasama siya. Ngayon, yung mga sinasabi niya, number one, corroborates previous statements made, given to us. And number two, he knows the other people who were involved. Kaya alam natin ang yung extent ng network. Kaya marami pa kaming persons of interest na hinahanap.
A freeze order has been issued on the assets of Teves, who was tagged as the brains in the attack on the Degamo residence in Pamplona town on March 4. Degamo was distributing aid to beneficiaries of the government's cash grant program when armed men in military uniforms arrived and shot the governor and 9 others. 8 provincial staff members and residents were killed during the attack that day, while 16 others were wounded. In the wake of the killings, the military and the police deployed more forces to the area to ensure peace and order.
Kay Congressman Teves yung pagkaalam. Yung ship house namin, yung may-ari nagtanong kasi ako kung sino may-ari ng Teves daw. Wala akong pangalan na sinabi.
Ang panawagan sa national government, Governor Degamo do not deserve that kind of death. He was serving his constituent on a Saturday along with his department heads. There were 5 others who died with him, who were there to ask for help. Give the governor the justice he deserves.
Earlier still, the Anti-Terrorism Council also designated community doctor Naty Castro as a terrorist. Doc Naty, to those who know her well, is a health worker who set up community health centers and programs in Mindanao. But the PNP has claimed that Castro is a member of the Communist Party of the Philippines Central Committee and head of its National Health Bureau based in Barangay Libertad in Butuan City. To recall, Castro was arrested in February 2022 in her home in Metro Manila and brought to Agusan del Sur on a warrant for kidnapping and serious illegal detention. Her legal counsel says she was taken from her home in San Juan, denied access to family or counsel, and flown to Agusan del Sur without notifying them. Specifically, Castro was designated for planning, training, preparing, and facilitating the commission of terrorism and recruitment to and membership in and providing material support to terrorist organizations or groups organized for the purpose of engaging in terrorism. Ethical side note: Doc Naty is represented by the Free Legal Assistance Group or FLAG. For full disclosure, I am an active member of FLAG. Now back to the podcast. The difference between Castro and Teves is night and day, but under the law, they've both been designated as terrorists. Designation. That's a new word. What does it mean, and what are its consequences? We're pausing for a quick break now. When we return, let's talk about it. That word, designation, entered the lexicon via Section 25 of the Anti-Terrorism Act. It is an executive power, meaning it falls under the power of the President, acting through his alter egos, in this case, the Anti-Terrorism Council. Under the Anti-Terrorism Act, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, there are two ways of designating a terrorist individual or group. The first is to adopt automatically previous listing of designated persons or groups from the United Nations Security Council. And the second is for the Anti-Terrorism Council to make a finding based on probable cause that the person or organization commits or is attempting to commit or has conspired in the commission of the acts defined and penalized as terrorism or related crimes under Sections 4 to 12 of the ATA. So what essentially is designation? What are its effects? And how is it different from a criminal charge and conviction for a criminal act? Designation simply means to classify a person or group as falling within a specified class of persons or groups considered as terrorists, without these persons or groups having been charged or convicted in a court of law for terrorism. Let me repeat that last part. Without these persons or groups having been charged or convicted in a court of law for terrorism. Designation traces its roots to American laws on immigration and later on terrorism, notably the U.S. Patriot Act, which was passed post 9/11. Designation is a counterterrorism measure designed to preemptively neutralize any acts of terrorism by allowing government to apply for authority to conduct surveillance of designated individuals and to freeze their assets. Again, all without need of a judicial trial or conviction for terrorism. Designated persons or groups do not need to be charged with or convicted of terrorism for the effects of designation under the Anti-Terrorism Act to take effect. Government can ask for authority to conduct surveillance of designated persons without the persons themselves knowing about it. It can freeze assets of the persons designated as terrorists, all without need of a judicial trial or a conviction for terrorism. Think about that. So why is designation problematic? First, the power is executive in nature. That is, it is a prerogative of the President. The Anti-Terrorism Council created under the Anti-Terrorism Act serves as an alter ego of the President. There is thus no recourse to due process before a designation is made, even as its effects are immediate and drastic. Second, designation is based simply on probable cause, a very low standard, and does not substitute for a conviction in a court of law. Yet its effects, authority to conduct surveillance and freezing of assets, are immediate and quite drastic, something which a court proceeding cannot immediately provide. Third, unlike a court proceeding which provides for remedies on appeal, A designation does not provide for the same meaningful remedies. While the person may ask the court to review the basis for the designation, the effects already take place. Fourth, publicly designating a person or a group already achieves the purpose of painting them as terrorists without need of a judicial conviction. Think about that for a second and how that affects you.
It is essential to note that for as long as violent acts fall within the definition of terrorism, the government will not hesitate to designate individuals or groups as such, as mandated by law to protect the greater welfare of our nation. We would also like to emphasize that the decision to designate individuals and groups as terrorists is not taken lightly. The Anti-Terrorism Council conducts thorough investigations and considers compelling evidence and factual incidents before making such designations. The process is governed by the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 and adheres to the principles of due process and respect for the rule of law. Moreover, the designations made by the ATC are based on a separate and independent investigation.
Just as an aside, sometime back, a science fiction film based on a novel by Philip K. Dick called Minority Report introduced us to the idea of pre-crime, where police could monitor criminal intent and stop any criminal acts before they took place. In a sense, preemptive measures such as designation under the Anti-Terrorism Act take a page from Minority Report, making science fiction into cold, hard fact. But back to the show. Going forward, the power of designation under the Anti-Terrorism Act does have a significant impact on the constitutionally guaranteed rights of individuals and groups. After all, it makes it more difficult for them to travel and to engage in their work, and that makes them more vulnerable to surveillance and other forms of government interference. In the long run, this all results in a chilling effect on dissent and on the work of human rights defenders. We've already seen groups that have not been charged with terrorism before any court in the country be designated and accused of allegedly providing funds to the Communist Party of the Philippines. It is quite possible that the persons designated may never be charged with terrorism, which requires a very high bar for proof, but will always be associated with the terrorist tag. This is all just to say that there's a real conversation to be had about what a terrorist is and what our laws say one is, because those have become two very different things that come to affect all of us. The designations of Teves and Castro are just two examples, but it is clear that it has the potential to stifle dissent and to erode human rights protections. Whether designations are unconstitutional, however, is a question that will have to wait until a designated person successfully challenges it in court. That was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Ted Te, and this has been TED Talks, our segment on all things law and governance. This episode was produced by Franco Luna and edited by Freddy Blanco. Our Teka Teka News executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior editor is Veronica Uri. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or two. And of course, don't forget to follow Teka Teka News and Puma Podcast on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube and you appreciated the episode, please take the time to like and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out in the YouTube algorithm. Thanks for listening.